A single father walks into his daughter's school cafeteria with a box of homemade cookies, expecting to see her smiling face. Instead, he discovers her isolated behind a cardboard barrier, publicly humiliated while her teacher watches with cold satisfaction. What this father uncovers in the next few hours will expose a shocking pattern of discrimination that goes far deeper than anyone imagined, and his fight for justice will shake an entire school district to its core. This is a story about a father's love, a daughter's courage, and the dark secrets hiding in plain sight. Jamal Washington's alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 a.m., just like it did every morning. In the quiet darkness of his small two-bedroom apartment, he moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd learned to be both mother and father. The coffee maker gurgled to life as he pulled out ingredients for Amara's lunch: turkey sandwich on whole wheat, apple slices, carrot sticks, and a juice box. Everything organized, everything planned. 3 years. That's how long it had been since his wife, Michelle, had passed from cancer. 3 years of learning to braid hair through YouTube videos. 3 years of attending ballet recitals alone with his camera. 3 years of being everything his daughter needed. And Jamal had risen to the challenge. His co-workers at the community center where he worked as a youth counselor often marveled at how he managed it all. Never late to pick up Amara, never missing a school event, always present. At 7 o'clock sharp, Amara emerged from her room, her hair pulled back in the slightly lopsided ponytail Jamal had managed that morning. At 8 years old, she had her mother's gentle spirit and infectious laugh, but lately something had changed. The brightness in her eyes had dimmed. "Morning, baby girl," Jamal said, setting her breakfast on their small kitchen table. "You sleep okay?" Amara climbed into her chair and nodded, but she didn't meet his eyes. This had been happening more frequently over the past 2 months. She'd pick at her food, offer one-word answers, and seem to carry a weight that no 8-year-old should bear. "Everything good at school?" Jamal asked, sitting across from her with his own coffee. "Yeah, Dad. It's fine." The automatic response came too quickly. Jamal wanted to press, but he'd learned that sometimes kids needed space. He'd asked her teacher, Mrs. Whitmore, during their last conference if everything was all right. The woman had smiled warmly and assured him that Amara was a delightful student, who was adjusting well. Those words had given him comfort then. Looking back, he'd realize how hollow they truly were. The drive to Pinewood Elementary was only 10 minutes, but it was Jamal's favorite part of the day. He'd play Amara's favorite songs, and they'd sing together, her small voice mixing with his deeper one. But this morning, she stared out the window in silence. "You sure you're okay, sweetheart?" he asked as they pulled into the drop-off line. "I'm fine, Daddy." She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes, grabbed her backpack, and hurried toward the school entrance. Jamal watched her go, that familiar knot of worry tightening in his chest. Something wasn't right, but he couldn't put his finger on what. At work that morning, Jamal led a conflict resolution workshop for teenagers, helping them navigate peer pressure and bullying. The irony wouldn't occur to him until later, that while he was teaching other children how to stand up for themselves, his own daughter was suffering in silence. Around 11 o'clock, during his lunch break, Jamal remembered the chocolate chip cookies he'd baked the night before. Amara had been so quiet lately that he thought surprising her at lunch might lift her spirits. It was something Michelle used to do, show up randomly with treats just to see their daughter's face light up. The school had an open lunch policy for parents, and Jamal had used it before during special occasions. He grabbed the container of cookies from his office fridge and headed to Pinewood Elementary, his heart light with anticipation. This would be good for both of them. Maybe she'd open up about whatever was bothering her. Maybe they'd share a laugh, and things would feel normal again, even if just for a few minutes. The school hallways were quiet as students attended their classes. Jamal signed in at the office, the receptionist greeting him with a warm smile. "Here to see Amara? How sweet." Lunch period just started. Thought I'd surprise her, Jamal said, holding up the cookie container. She's lucky to have you, Mr. Washington. Those words would echo in his mind later with bitter irony. Jamal walked toward the cafeteria, his dress shoes clicking against the polished floor. He could hear the sounds before he reached it, the cacophony of children's voices, laughter, the clatter of trays. Normal sounds. Happy sounds. He pushed through the double doors with a smile, his eyes scanning the crowded room for his daughter's face. The smile died on his lips. At first, he didn't understand what he was seeing. In the far corner of the cafeteria, partially hidden by the angle of the wall, stood a cardboard partition, the kind used for science fair displays. And behind it, visible only because of her height, was Amara. She stood, not sat, at a small section of table, eating her sandwich with her head down, completely separated from the other children. Jamal's breath caught in his throat. His feet moved forward automatically, carrying him through the maze of lunch tables. Other children noticed him, some waving, but he barely registered them. His entire focus had narrowed to that cardboard barrier and his daughter behind it. As he got closer, he could see her more clearly. Her shoulders were hunched, her movements small and careful, as if she were trying to take up as little space as possible. And standing nearby, arms crossed, watching with an expression that made Jamal's blood run cold, was Mrs. Patricia Whitmore. Before we continue with what happened next in this shocking confrontation, I need to pause for just a moment. I spent countless hours researching and crafting this story to bring you something truly meaningful. A story about injustice, courage, and a father's unwavering love. If stories like this touch your heart and you want to see more real accounts of people standing up against discrimination and fighting for what's right, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. It means the world to me and helps these important stories reach others who need to hear them. Now, let's see what Jamal discovered when he confronted that teacher. The container of cookies slipped from Jamal's hand, hitting the floor with a hollow plastic thud. The sound echoed through the cafeteria, drawing attention from nearby tables. Children turned to look, their conversations pausing mid-sentence. But Jamal barely noticed. His eyes were locked on the scene before him. His daughter, isolated and humiliated, standing behind that cardboard wall like she was being punished. "What is this?" The words came out low and dangerous, cutting through the ambient noise of the lunchroom. Jamal's voice had that quality that made people stop and pay attention. The controlled fury of a man who was fighting to keep his composure. Mrs. Patricia Whitmore turned sharply, her face registering surprise, then something else. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. She was a woman in her late 50s, with perfectly styled gray hair and the kind of stern demeanor that some mistook for discipline but others recognized as cruelty. "Mr. Washington," she said, her voice artificially bright as she moved to position herself between Jamal and the partition. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting. I asked you a question." Jamal stepped around her, his focus entirely on Amara. His daughter had looked up at the sound of his voice, and the expression on her face nearly broke him. It wasn't surprise or even relief. It was shame. Pure, crushing shame that no child should ever feel. "Daddy." Her voice was small, barely above a whisper. Tears had started streaming down her cheeks. Tears she'd clearly been holding back all through lunch. Jamal reached the partition and, without hesitation, pushed it aside. The cardboard scraped loudly against the cafeteria floor, revealing the full scene. Amara stood at a tiny section of table, no chair provided, her lunch spread out before her. The space was barely 3 feet wide, tucked into the corner like a makeshift prison. "Baby girl," Jamal knelt down, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "How long has this been happening?" Amara couldn't speak. She just fell into her father's arms, her small body shaking with sobs she'd been suppressing for who knew how long. Jamal held her, feeling each tremor, each gasping breath, and something fundamental shifted inside him. This wasn't just wrong. This was intentional cruelty. "Mr. Washington, if you'd just let me explain," Mrs. Whitmore began, her voice taking on a defensive edge. Jamal stood, keeping Amara close to his side, and fixed the teacher with a look that made her take a step back. Explain. Explain why my 8-year-old daughter is eating lunch standing up, isolated from her classmates, hidden behind a cardboard wall. His voice rose with each word. Explain why she looks like she's being punished when I know for a fact she hasn't done anything wrong? Other teachers had started to notice the commotion. Ms. Rodriguez, the young second-grade teacher, approached cautiously. Several parents who'd been volunteering in the cafeteria had their phones out, some clearly recording. The children at nearby tables had gone quiet, watching the confrontation with wide eyes. Mrs. Whitmore's face flushed red. "This is a school policy matter, Mr. Washington. If you'd like to discuss it, we should step into the hallway." "No." The word came out flat and absolute. "We're going to discuss it right here, right now. Because whatever policy you're claiming to follow, you're applying it to my daughter in front of all these children. So they can hear the explanation too." "It's about lunch debt," Mrs. Whitmore said quickly, grasping at the excuse. "Students with outstanding balances are required to eat separately until—" "Lunch debt." Jamal's voice cracked with disbelief. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, navigating to his banking app. "I paid for Amara's entire semester in advance. In August. I have the receipt right here." He turned the screen toward her, showing the transaction. $350. Paid in full. The color drained from Mrs. Whitmore's face. Around them, murmurs rippled through the cafeteria. Several parents exchanged glances. Ms. Rodriguez moved closer, her expression troubled. "There must be some administrative error," Mrs. Whitmore stammered. "The system showed." "Don't." Jamal's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but it carried more weight than any shout. "Don't insult my intelligence and don't insult my daughter. This isn't about lunch debt. So I'm going to ask you one more time, why is my daughter being treated like this?" The silence that followed was deafening. Amara pressed closer to her father, her hands clutching his shirt. Jamal could feel her trembling, could feel the weight of weeks or maybe months of this treatment settling over him like a suffocating blanket. "How long, baby?" he asked gently, looking down at his daughter. "How long has Mrs. Whitmore been making you eat like this?" Amara's voice was barely audible. "Since October, Daddy. Right after parent-teacher conferences." October. 2 months. 2 months of his daughter enduring this humiliation every single day while he'd asked her if everything was okay, while she'd said fine with that forced smile, while she'd grown quieter and more withdrawn. 2 months while he'd trusted that the school was taking care of her, that Mrs. Whitmore was the dedicated educator the principal had praised at the start of the year. "And why did she say you had to eat here?" Jamal asked, though his eyes never left the teacher. "She said." Amara hiccuped, trying to control her crying. "She said I was disruptive. That I talked too much during lunch and bothered the other kids. That I needed to learn discipline and respect." Disruptive. Jamal's hand tightened on his phone. His daughter, who read books during recess, who apologized when she accidentally bumped into furniture, who worried about being too loud when she laughed. "My daughter is disruptive?" Ms. Rodriguez stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. "Mr. Washington, I have Amara in my reading enrichment group. She's one of the most well-behaved, considerate students I've ever worked with. She's never once been disruptive." Mrs. Whitmore shot the younger teacher a withering look. "You don't have her in your classroom full-time. You don't see." "I see a little girl who's been isolated and humiliated," Ms. Rodriguez interrupted, her professional courtesy cracking. "And I see a lunch policy being weaponized in a way that's absolutely inappropriate." One of the parent volunteers, a woman Jamal recognized from school events, spoke up hesitantly. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've been volunteering during lunch for 3 weeks now. I've never seen Amara be disruptive. She barely talks to anyone." The woman's voice grew more confident. "In fact, now that I think about it, I've only seen you isolate certain children this way. And they're all—" She trailed off, but Jamal heard what she didn't say. "They're all black children." The realization hit him like a physical blow. He looked around the cafeteria with new eyes, searching for other isolated students, other cardboard barriers. He didn't see any. Not today. But the parent volunteer's words suggested there had been others. His hands shook as the full picture started to come together. Principal Hayes needs to be involved in this conversation, Jamal said, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. Right now. Mrs. Whitmore straightened, regaining some of her composure. Mr. Washington, you're making a scene. These children don't need to witness. These children need to witness accountability. Jamal cut her off. They need to see that adults don't get to abuse their power without consequences. They need to see that fathers protect their daughters. He pulled out his phone again. I'm calling the principal. And then I'm calling the school board. And if I don't get answers that make sense, I'm calling the local news. What would you do if you discovered your child was being treated this way at school? Would you have handled this situation differently? Let me know your thoughts below. I read every comment, and I want to hear your perspective on standing up against injustice. Principal Margaret Hayes arrived at the cafeteria within minutes, her heels clicking urgently against the floor. She was a woman in her early 60s, known for running a tight ship at Pinewood Elementary. But as she took in the scene, the overturned partition, Amara clinging to her father, the circle of parents with phones raised, and Mrs. Whitmore's defensive posture, her professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing genuine alarm. Mr. Washington, let's move this conversation to my office, she said, her tone attempting authority but landing somewhere closer to pleading. No, Jamal replied firmly. We're past private conversations. My daughter was humiliated publicly. This gets addressed publicly. Principal Hayes's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Mrs. Whitmore, please explain what's happening here. What followed was a masterclass in deflection. Mrs. Whitmore spoke about classroom management techniques, about behavioral modification strategies, about district-approved disciplinary measures. She used educational jargon like a shield, trying to make her actions sound reasonable, even necessary. But Jamal had worked with troubled youth for 7 years. He knew the language of institutional abuse when he heard it. You're describing isolation as punishment, he said, cutting through her explanation. You're describing public humiliation of an 8-year-old child. And you're claiming it's educational policy. He turned to Principal Hayes. Is this district policy? Is this how Pinewood Elementary handles discipline? Principal Hayes's face had gone pale. No, absolutely not. We have structured consequences for behavioral issues, but isolation during lunch is not one of them, especially not without parent notification and documentation. There was no notification, Jamal confirmed. No phone calls, no emails, no notes sent home. Nothing. For 2 months, my daughter has been enduring this, and I had no idea. Ms. Rodriguez, who had stayed close by, added quietly, Principal Hayes, I think you should know, I've witnessed Mrs. Whitmore use similar isolation tactics with at least 3 other students this semester. All of them were students of color. The cafeteria erupted in murmurs. Parents exchanged shocked glances. Several pulled their children closer, as if seeing the school through new eyes. One mother, an attorney Jamal recognized from school fundraisers, was typing rapidly on her phone. Mrs. Whitmore's face turned crimson. That's a serious accusation, Ms. Rodriguez. You're implying. I'm stating facts, the young teacher interrupted, her voice shaking but resolute. Marcus Williams spent 2 weeks eating alone in September. Jasmine Chen was isolated for a week in October. And Amara has been separated since November. I documented the dates because it troubled me, but She faltered, shame crossing her features. I should have reported it sooner. I was afraid of retaliation. Jamal felt a surge of gratitude toward this young teacher who was risking her career to speak truth. But he also felt the weight of systemic failure. How many adults had seen and said nothing? How many had convinced themselves it wasn't their problem? I want my daughter transferred to another class immediately, Jamal stated. And I want a formal investigation into Mrs. Whitmore's treatment of students. Today. Principal Hayes nodded quickly. Of course. Mr. Washington, I assure you we take these allegations very seriously." "Allegations?" The attorney mother stepped forward, her phone still in hand. "Principal Hayes, I've just sent video of this confrontation to 3 other parents whose children are in Mrs. Whitmore's class. We're organizing an emergency parent meeting for tonight. The school board will be invited. The press will be invited. This stops now." What Jamal didn't know, what he couldn't have anticipated, was that Mrs. Whitmore wasn't just a problem teacher. She was the sister-in-law of Robert Caldwell, the district superintendent, and the network of protection around her ran deeper than anyone realized. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, Jamal had received a call from the district's legal office. A smooth-voiced man named Thomas Brennan explained that while the district took all concerns seriously, there were proper channels for complaints. He strongly advised Jamal to avoid inflammatory accusations and warned that defamation carries serious legal consequences. The threat was barely veiled. "Speak up, and we'll bury you in legal fees." Jamal sat in his car outside the community center. Amara buckled safely in the back seat and felt the weight of what he was up against. He wasn't naive. He'd worked in social services long enough to know how institutions protected their own. But knowing it intellectually and experiencing it personally were 2 different things. "Daddy." Amara's small voice broke through his thoughts. "Are you mad at me?" The question shattered him. He turned to face his daughter, seeing the guilt and confusion in her eyes. "Baby girl, no. Never. None of this is your fault. You understand me. Not one bit of it. But if I had been better in class if I hadn't." "Stop." Jamal unbuckled and climbed into the back seat, pulling his daughter into his arms. "Listen to me, Amara. You are smart and kind and good. What Mrs. Whitmore did was wrong. Adults are supposed to protect children, not hurt them. And sometimes when adults do wrong things, other adults have to stand up and fight back. That's what Daddy's going to do. Even if it's hard." Amara whispered against his chest. "Especially when it's hard." That evening, Jamal's small apartment became command central. His mother, Gloria Washington, arrived first, her face set in the same determined expression Jamal had inherited. At 72, she'd marched with civil rights activists in her youth and had no patience for injustice in any form. "They think they can intimidate you," she said, setting down a container of food she'd brought. "Baby, I've been threatened by people a lot scarier than some school district lawyer. We fight this." Next came Marcus, Jamal's older brother and a journalist for the local newspaper. "I've already started making calls," he said, laptop open on the kitchen table. "The education reporter is very interested. And I reached out to a contact at the ACLU. This kind of discriminatory discipline practice, they'll want to know about it." Jamal's best friend, Tyrell, showed up with his wife, both offering to help however they could. "You're not alone in this, man," Tyrell said, clasping Jamal's shoulder. "Whatever you need." By 7 p.m., Jamal's living room was filled with parents from Amara's school. The attorney mother, Lisa Chen, Jasmine's mother, had organized the gathering. 12 families in total, comparing notes, sharing stories. A pattern emerged that made Jamal's blood boil. Mrs. Whitmore had been systematically targeting children of color in her classroom for years. The isolation during lunch was just one tactic. There were also excessive disciplinary referrals, lower grades despite quality work, exclusion from classroom privileges, and dismissive communication with parents. "I thought it was just us," said Marcus Williams's father, his voice thick with emotion. "My son came home crying every day, saying he was stupid, that he couldn't do anything right. I met with Mrs. Whitmore 3 times. She kept saying he had behavioral problems, needed medication for ADHD. We had him evaluated. There's nothing wrong with him. He's just a normal 7-year-old boy. She told me Jasmine was too aggressive for expressing her opinions in class," Lisa Chen added. "My daughter is quiet and thoughtful. But apparently, when she raised her hand to answer questions, it was aggressive. When white students did the same thing, they were enthusiastic learners." Story after story, each one a small violence, each one carefully designed to break down a child's sense of self-worth. Jamal felt sick listening, But he also felt something else. Determination crystallizing into purpose. "We document everything," he said, standing up to address the group. "Every incident, every conversation, every email. We present a united front to the school board. They can threaten one parent with legal action, but they can't silence all of us." But even as plans formed, even as the community rallied, Jamal received a text message that made his heart sink. It was from his supervisor at the community center. "Need to see you first thing tomorrow. District called with concerns about your conduct." This is serious, Jamal. His job. They were going after his job. The community center received funding from the school district. The connection wasn't direct, but it didn't have to be. The message was clear. Back down or lose your livelihood. Jamal looked at Amara, asleep on the couch, exhausted from the emotional toll of the day. He thought about the other children, about the pattern of harm that would continue if no one stood firm. He thought about his late wife Michelle, who'd always told him, "Do what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." He typed his response, "I'll be there at 8 a.m. Then he turned back to the parents gathered in his living room and said, "They're going to try to make this personal. They're going to try to divide us, intimidate us, make us think speaking up isn't worth it. We have to decide right now if we're willing to see this through, no matter what it costs." The room fell silent. Then, one by one, every parent nodded. Have you ever had to overcome obstacles to help someone you cared about? Have you ever had to choose between staying silent and risking everything to do what's right? What challenges did you face? Share your experience below. Your story might inspire someone else who's facing a difficult decision. The next morning, Jamal walked into his supervisor's office with his head held high. David Morrison sat behind his desk, looking uncomfortable, a man caught between institutional pressure and personal conscience. "Jamal, sit down," David said, gesturing to the chair. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you. I got a call from the district superintendent's office yesterday. They're concerned about your aggressive behavior at Pinewood Elementary." Aggressive. Jamal kept his voice level. "I discovered my daughter being publicly humiliated and I demanded answers. That's not aggression. That's parenting." David sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know, man. I know. And between you and me, I think what happened to Amara is absolutely wrong. But the district funds 20% of our operating budget. Superintendent Caldwell suggested, strongly suggested, that maybe you need some time off. Paid leave while things cool down. That's retaliation, David. You know that." "I know." David's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "But I've got 40 other staff members depending on this center staying open. I've got programs serving hundreds of kids. If the district pulls funding..." He trailed off, the impossible choice hanging between them. Jamal sat back in his chair, understanding the position his friend was in. This was how systems of power maintain themselves. Not through direct confrontation, but through economic pressure, through making people choose between justice and survival. "What if I told you," Jamal said slowly, "that by tomorrow morning, this story will be on the front page of the newspaper? What if I told you that the ACLU is reviewing the case? What if I told you that 12 families are filing a formal civil rights complaint with the Department of Education?" David's eyes widened. "Jamal. They're betting on silence, David. They're betting that I'll choose my job over my daughter's dignity. They're betting that the other parents will get scared and back down. But what they don't understand is that some things are more important than comfort." Jamal leaned forward. "I'm not taking a leave of absence. If you need to fire me to keep the funding, I understand. But I won't make it easy for them by disappearing quietly." There was a long silence. Then David did something unexpected. He smiled. "Michelle would be proud of you, you know that? She'd probably say I should have acted sooner." "Maybe." David opened his desk drawer and pulled out a folder. "But she'd also tell you that you're not alone. My wife is a teacher. She's seen this kind of thing before. I'm not firing you, Jamal. Let them pull the funding if they want. We'll figure something else out. Some things are worth fighting for." The solidarity meant everything, but Jamal knew the real battle was just beginning. That evening, the emergency school board meeting was packed. The small conference room at the district office could barely contain the crowd. Parents, teachers, community members, and 3 local news cameras. Jamal sat in the front row, Amara beside him, his mother on her other side. Lisa Chen sat nearby, her attorney credentials giving weight to the parent coalition. Behind them, rows of supporters filled every available seat. Superintendent Robert Caldwell called the meeting to order, his face impassive. He was a man in his late 60s, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority going unchallenged. "We're here to address concerns raised about disciplinary practices at Pinewood Elementary," he began, his tone suggesting this was an administrative formality. "The district takes all allegations seriously and has begun an internal review." An internal review? Lisa Chen stood up, her voice cutting through his prepared statement. "With all due respect, Superintendent Caldwell, your sister-in-law is the teacher being accused. How can we trust an internal review when there's such a clear conflict of interest?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Caldwell's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Chen, I assure you that my relationship to Mrs. Whitmore will not affect." "Then you should recuse yourself from this investigation entirely," she interrupted. "And the district should bring in an independent third party to review the allegations. That's what I would recommend to any of my clients facing similar circumstances." Marcus Washington, Jamal's brother, stood next. "I'm a journalist with the Tribune. This afternoon, we're running a front-page story detailing a pattern of discriminatory discipline practices at Pinewood Elementary spanning 3 years. We've documented 19 separate incidents involving 12 different students, all children of color. We've reviewed discipline records, interviewed parents, and consulted with education policy experts. This isn't about one teacher having a bad day. This is systemic." The room erupted. Parents began sharing their stories, their voices overlapping in a chorus of long-suppressed grievances. School board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The news cameras captured every moment. Jamal stood, and somehow the room quieted. Perhaps it was the weight of his presence, or the fact that this had all begun with him, but people listened. "My daughter is 8 years old," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "For 2 months, she ate lunch standing up, isolated from her peers, made to feel like there was something wrong with her. Not because she misbehaved. Not because she was disruptive. But because her teacher decided she was a problem that needed to be contained." He paused, looking directly at Superintendent Caldwell. "You want to do an internal review? Fine. But while you do, Mrs. Whitmore needs to be removed from the classroom. Today. And every child she's harmed deserves an apology from this district." "Mr. Washington," Caldwell began, his tone patronizing, "I understand you're upset, but these are serious accusations that require due process. We can't simply remove a teacher with 25 years of experience based on..." "Based on what?" Jamal's voice rose. "Based on documented evidence? Based on testimony from multiple families? Based on video of my daughter crying behind a cardboard wall while your sister-in-law watched with satisfaction?" He pulled out his phone, holding it up. "I have that video, Superintendent. So do 11 other parents. So do 3 news stations. The question isn't whether Mrs. Whitmore did these things. The question is whether this board has the courage to hold her accountable." What happened next surprised everyone. From the back of the room, an elderly woman stood up. She was impeccably dressed, with white hair and an air of quiet authority. Several school board members recognized her immediately. Dr. Eleanor Hartley, former state education commissioner and a legend in educational policy circles. "Superintendent Caldwell," she said, her voice carrying despite her age, "I've been sitting here listening to these testimonies and I'm appalled. Not just at the actions of one teacher, but at the system that enabled her." She walked forward, every eye following her. "I retired 5 years ago, but I still care deeply about education in this district. And what I'm hearing tonight suggests a failure of leadership at every level." She turned to address the room. "I'm offering my services, pro bono, to conduct an independent investigation. I have no ties to this district, no conflicts of interest, and 50 years of experience in educational administration. I'll review every complaint, interview every witness, and present my findings to the school board, the state education department, and the public." She looked back at Caldwell. Unless the district has something to hide? The superintendent was trapped. Refusing would confirm suspicions of a cover-up. Accepting meant losing control of the narrative. The cameras were rolling. The room waited. "The board will take your offer under consideration," he said finally. "I'm afraid that's not good enough," said board member Patricia Williams, a woman who'd been notably silent until now. "Dr. Hartley's offer is exactly what this situation requires. I move that we accept her proposal and place Mrs. Whitmore on administrative leave pending the investigation's outcome." "I second," another board member added quickly. The vote was 4-3. Mrs. Whitmore would be removed from the classroom. Dr. Hartley would lead the investigation. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. As the meeting adjourned, reporters swarmed the parents for interviews. But Jamal just knelt down beside Amara, who'd been so brave and quiet throughout the entire proceeding. "You did good, baby girl," he said softly. "You were so brave. Is Mrs. Whitmore going to hurt other kids now?" Amara asked, her eyes worried. "No, sweetheart. That's what we just stopped. She can't hurt anyone anymore." Over the next 3 weeks, Dr. Hartley's investigation uncovered even more than the parents had documented. Mrs. Whitmore had been systematically discriminating against students of color for over 5 years. Her gradebook showed consistent patterns of lower grades for equivalent work. Her discipline referrals were 3 times higher for Black and Hispanic students than for white students with similar behavior. And her isolation tactics, the cardboard petitions, the separated seating, the public humiliation, had affected at least 23 children. The report was damning. Mrs. Whitmore was terminated. Superintendent Caldwell was placed on probation, and ultimately chose to retire. 3 other teachers who'd enabled or ignored the behavior received formal reprimands and mandatory bias training. But the real transformation went deeper than administrative changes. 6 months later, Jamal stood in that same cafeteria, but everything had changed. The district had implemented new oversight protocols, mandatory bias training for all staff, and a parent advisory committee with real power to investigate complaints. Ms. Rodriguez had been promoted to assistant principal, her courage in speaking up recognized and rewarded. And Amara. She was laughing with her friends at a lunch table. No barriers, no isolation, just a child being a child. Her grades had improved dramatically. Her confidence had returned. She'd even joined the school choir, her voice finally freed from the weight of shame she'd been carrying. But what moved Jamal most was what came next. A shy 7-year-old boy approached him. Marcus Williams, one of the other children Mrs. Whitmore had targeted. "Mr. Washington," the boy said quietly. "My dad said you're the reason I don't have to eat alone anymore. Thank you." Jamal knelt down to the boy's level. "You know what, Marcus? You're worth fighting for. Every child in this school is worth fighting for. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you're not." The boy smiled, then ran off to join his friends. Lisa Chen walked over, watching her daughter Jasmine chatting animatedly with a group of classmates. "We did it," she said simply. "We did," Jamal agreed. "But it shouldn't have taken all this. It shouldn't have required 12 families, a journalist, a lawyer, and a former education commissioner to get basic human dignity for our children. No, it shouldn't have. But that's why we can't stop here." Lisa pulled out a folder. "I've been contacted by parents from 3 other schools in the district. They've seen the news coverage. They're dealing with similar issues. They want to know if we'll help them." Jamal looked at his daughter, heard her laughter, saw the light back in her eyes. He thought about all the other children in other schools, carrying weights they shouldn't have to bear, suffering in silence because their parents didn't know how to fight back or were too afraid to try. "Yeah," he said. "We'll help them." The Parent Coalition became a permanent organization. Parents United for Educational Equity. They provided resources, support, and advocacy for families facing discrimination in schools. They pushed for policy changes at the state level. They trained parents on their rights and how to document concerns. They created a network of support that ensured no parent had to fight alone. Jamal continued his work at the community center, but now he also spent evenings meeting with parents, reviewing cases, and strategizing with advocates. His mother, Gloria, became the organization's unofficial grandmother, showing up at school board meetings with cookies and unwavering moral authority. And Amara. She grew into a confident young woman who understood, from her own experience, the importance of standing up against injustice. On her 12th birthday, when asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, she said, "Someone who makes sure no kid ever feels the way I felt behind that wall." Jamal pulled her close, tears in his eyes. His daughter had survived, thrived, and transformed her pain into purpose. That was the real victory. Not just changing a policy or removing a teacher, but ensuring that what she endured would protect others from suffering the same way. The cookies he'd dropped on the cafeteria floor that terrible Tuesday were long gone. But what they represented, a father's love, a moment of discovery, a decision to act, had created ripples that spread far beyond one school, one family, one community. Sometimes justice requires just one person to say, "Enough." But transformation requires a community willing to stand together and refuse to accept the unacceptable. This story shows how one act of courage can change everything. What's one way you could make a difference in someone's life today? Have you ever witnessed injustice and wished you'd spoken up? Challenge yourself to be someone's advocate this week, and share your commitment in the comments. What will you do differently? Today, 5 years after that fateful Tuesday in the cafeteria, Jamal Washington is 13 years old and thriving. She's an honor student, a member of her school's debate team, and a peer mentor for younger students who are struggling. More importantly, she carries herself with the confidence of someone who knows her worth. Not because she was never knocked down, but because she was lifted back up by a community that refused to let her fall. Jamal continues his work at the community center, but Parents United for Educational Equity has grown beyond anything he imagined. The organization now operates in 17 school districts across the state, has helped over 300 families advocate for their children, and successfully lobbied for state legislation requiring independent oversight of discrimination complaints in schools. Last year, Jamal was invited to speak at the state capitol about equitable education practices. Standing at that podium, he thought about the scared father he'd been that day in the cafeteria, and realized how far they'd all come. Dr. Eleanor Hartley never really retired after all. At 78, she now serves as the chief advisor for Parents United, bringing her decades of expertise to families who need it most. She calls it the most important work of my career. Ms. Rodriguez, now Principal Rodriguez, has transformed Pinewood Elementary into a model of inclusive education. The school has won state recognition for its restorative justice practices and its commitment to equity. She keeps a photo in her office. Amara and her classmates at lunch, laughing together, no barriers between them. It reminds her why she became an educator in the first place. As for the other children who suffered under Mrs. Whitmore's discriminatory practices, Marcus Williams is now in middle school, excelling in science. Jasmine Chen won her school's Creative Writing Award last semester. Each child recovered at their own pace, but they all carried forward an important lesson. Their voices matter, their experiences are valid, and there are adults willing to fight for them. The Pinewood Elementary cafeteria was renovated 2 years ago. It's brighter now, more open, with round tables that encourage community rather than isolation. On the wall near the entrance, there's a mural painted by students. It shows children of all backgrounds sitting together, laughing, belonging. At the bottom, in letters the children painted themselves, it reads, "Every child deserves dignity, respect, and a place at the table." Jamal stops by sometimes, just to see it, to remember, to remind himself why the fight was worth it. This story isn't just about one father and one daughter. It's about the countless children who experience discrimination in schools every single day, subtle and overt, intentional and systemic. It's about the parents who feel powerless against institutions that seem too big to challenge. And it's about the transformative power of refusing to accept injustice, even when speaking up comes at a cost. Jamal Washington could have stayed quiet. He could have simply transferred his daughter to another class and moved on, avoiding the legal threats, the job pressure, the exhausting battle against a system designed to protect itself. Many parents do. And no one could blame them. Survival is a valid choice when you're facing institutional power. But Jamal made a different choice. And because he did, 23 children were freed from ongoing harm. Because he did, policies changed. Because he did, other parents found the courage to speak up about their own children's experiences. One act of courage created a ripple effect that continues to spread. The truth is, most of us will never face a moment as dramatic as discovering our child behind a cardboard barrier in a cafeteria. But all of us will face smaller moments. Opportunities to speak up when we witness unfairness, chances to stand with someone who's being marginalized, decisions about whether to prioritize our comfort or someone else's dignity. Those moments matter. Those choices accumulate. And collectively, they shape the world our children inherit. You don't need to be a lawyer or a journalist or an education commissioner to make a difference. You just need to be willing to say, "This isn't right," and mean it enough to act. You need to be willing to stand with others who are fighting battles you might not fully understand. You need to be willing to use whatever privilege, platform, or power you have to amplify voices that are being silenced. Change doesn't happen because systems suddenly develop a conscience. Change happens because ordinary people decide that the status quo is unacceptable and refuse to participate in it anymore. Stories like this remind us that extraordinary courage exists in ordinary people. In single fathers checking on their daughters at lunch, in young teachers risking their careers to speak truth, in communities deciding that protecting children matters more than protecting reputations. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about the power each of us has to create change, please like this video. It helps more people discover these important stories about standing up against injustice and fighting for what's right. Subscribe to this channel for more true stories of courage, justice, and the transformation that happens when people refuse to stay silent. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that might inspire you to see the world differently and act more boldly. And most importantly, look for your moment. It might not be dramatic. It might be as simple as speaking up in a meeting when someone is being dismissed, or supporting a friend who's facing discrimination, or teaching your own children that their dignity and the dignity of others is worth defending. What act of courage will you commit to this week? What injustice will you refuse to accept? Let me know in the comments below. Your commitment might inspire someone else to find their courage too. Thank you for watching this story about Jamal and Amara Washington. Thank you for caring about justice and equality. And remember, you have more power than you think to change someone's entire world. Sometimes, all it takes is showing up, speaking up, and refusing to look away. The question isn't whether injustice exists. We know it does. The question is, what will we do when we see it? Will we be bystanders, or will we be the ones who say enough? Your answer to that question matters more than you know.